Hey guys, tonight we begin with the surprisingly structured, honest, and often misunderstood life of a prostitute in medieval times. She played a real part in the economy in very practical ways. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you truly enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is. It's always interesting to see friends joining from all over the world. Now, dim the lights, maybe switch on a fan for that gentle background hum, and let's relax into tonight's story together. You wake up to the soft sound of someone being sick in the street below your window, which is really just a hole in the wall covered with cloth. Glass is only for churches or for people who earn more than 4 copper coins a night. Your room, which people kindly call a chamber, is about the size of a pig pen, and it smells like one too. The wooden walls are old and stained, bent in a way that makes you wonder if the building is ready to fall. The roof leaks when it rains, creaks when it doesn't, and one of the floorboards moves with a strange wet sound. You stopped asking why a long time ago. Your mattress is just a lumpy bag of straw, filled with dreams, back pain, and sometimes a flea or two. You move and hear a crunch under you. You tell yourself it's just an almond from last week's festival, a festival you didn't even go to. There's no pillow, only a bundle of old cloth that might once have been a shirt. You put it under your neck, scratch at an itch on your arm, and stare at the ceiling, hoping today won't bring any strange or unwanted visitors. You whisper a short prayer to Saint Mary Magdalene, who is said to protect women like you, and throw off your blanket. It's damp, as always. Across the narrow hallway, you hear Gertrude ending her night's work. She laughs, then coughs, then talks about rats again. She has been here longer than you and says she once met a rich nobleman. No one really believes her, but we all like her hopefulness. The footsteps of the house owner creak on the stairs. You feel nervous. She is holding her book of accounts and shouting about unpaid rent, torn bed sheets, and someone using the expensive soap again. You quickly get up. There's no time to feel sorry for yourself. Not when you owe rent. Your makeup is running out, and you're expected to be downstairs in 10 minutes for your first visitor, a city guard who likes hearing compliments. You have already practiced what you will say to him. You splash cold water on your face. It's cold enough to make you shiver, but not enough to make you feel clean. You sigh, stand tall, and say to yourself, another beautiful day in paradise. You start your day like any other professional, wondering if that stain on your dress is wine, blood, or last night's stew. You smell it. You wish you hadn't. It's stew. Probably. In the corner of your room, there's a broken clay bowl filled with water that has been sitting there all night. The water is just cold enough to make you shiver, but not cold enough to grow anything in it. You splash it on your face. It wakes you up instantly and reminds you that proper plumbing is something people in the future will be proud to have. You reach for a small piece of soap. It's not there. You blame Gertrude again. She's known for taking other people's things without ever returning them. Instead, you clean under your arms with a piece of rough cloth and a quick prayer. Staying fresh is a choice here. Smelling bad is not. Your hair is a mess, which, in this place, is actually a compliment. You comb it with your fingers, which are sore from washing bed sheets the night before, and tie it back with a ribbon that used to be white before life changed its color. You think about putting on makeup, maybe a little blush, maybe some ash to make your cheekbones stand out. But you decide that looking tired is acceptable, especially if the customer is too drunk to notice. Getting dressed is simple. You wear the outfit required by the city rules, a faded red gown that says, I am available for work, and I pay my taxes. It's a shade of red that feels like passion, regret, and public shame all mixed together. You slide on your shoes, mismatched cracked, but thankfully yours, and step into the hallway where the air smells of boiled cabbage and bad choices. Downstairs, you can already hear the owner shouting about unpaid rent and something valuable that has gone missing. You don't ask questions. Before going down, you check your reflection in the piece of shiny metal nailed to the wall. You smile. It's good enough. You have mastered the art of looking interested while thinking about something else entirely. It's your most useful skill. As you go down the stairs, the smell of cheap beer hits you. You hear boots stomping mud onto the floor, and you can't ignore the feeling that someone has already been sick in the fireplace. It's Monday morning. Your first customer of the day arrives just after the church bells finish ringing. He's early, eager, and smells of flour, and like someone who works hard and sweats for a living. You know him. He's the baker from 2 streets away, middle-aged, married, and always sure he's your favorite. He greets you with a crooked smile and a fresh loaf of bread, as if bread counts as payment. Technically, the house owner does accept bread. Technically, she also eats it herself, and then tells everyone you're still behind on rent. You show him into your small room, which is still airing out from last night's vinegar cleaning. He compliments your hair, though it's greasy, your skin, though it's blotchy, and your dress, which is regulation issue and smells faintly of boiled onions. You thank him anyway. Here, polite words are the real currency. He removes his clothes quickly, like someone in a race that nobody else is running. His shirt falls to the floor. His stockings hang loosely. He asks if you remember him from last week. You lie and say yes. He smiles brightly. You go through the usual steps. You act as though he's charming. He acts as though he's impressive. It's over in about the time it would take a monk to light a candle. Then he lies back, out of breath, still full of compliments. You smile politely, the way someone smiles when they've seen everything and nothing surprises them anymore. He lingers, talks about his wife, says she doesn't understand him. You nod kindly while quietly wondering if the bread he brought is already going stale. Before leaving, he sets the loaf on your table, like he's offering you treasure. It's still warm. You can't be upset. Bread is bread, and you haven't had anything warm since the last feast day. When he's gone, you check the coin pouch he left. It's short by 2 pennies, again. You sigh, put the coins in your pocket, and make a mental note to add them to your growing list of debts. You think about eating the bread now, but decide to wait. If your next customer doesn't show, it will be your comfort for the day. You shake out the straw mattress, smooth your gown, and light a bit of dried lavender to freshen the room. A new day, another small disappointment. And that was just the morning. With the baker gone, and your pride still mostly intact, you head downstairs for breakfast, or as it's called here, whatever hasn't already been taken. The long table is surrounded by the rest of the women, each looking a little worse for wear. Marjorie is pulling straw from her hair. Beatrice is holding a cabbage leaf against a strange bruise. Gertrude, as usual, looks far too pleased with herself, which probably means someone important paid her in real coins. You take your seat and look over the breakfast. A wooden plate with stale bread crusts, a chunk of yellow cheese sweating in the cool air, and half a boiled onion. There's also a shared mug of watered-down ale, warm and cloudy, like the future. You break off a piece of bread, careful not to break a tooth. Marjorie passes you the ale mug. You hesitate. She had a cough last week, one that didn't sound healthy, but you drink anyway. It's that, or eat the onion raw, and you still have customers to see later. The conversation at the table is slow, messy, and full of odd little details. Gertrude is loudly gossiping about a knight who cried and asked to be helped. Beatrice claims she saw the mayor's wife sneaking out the back door last night. No one questions it. No one really wants to know. The madam suddenly appears, like a tax collector stepping out of the fog. She looks at the bread, takes the last good piece for herself, and announces that the city inspector will be visiting this week. Groans spread around the table. That means cleaning, fixing things, and pretending the walls aren't starting to grow mold. You look at the leftover bread crust and quietly slip it into your sleeve for later. Desperation is great for saving leftovers. You're just starting to enjoy the cheese, which might be mold or might be seasoning, when the bell above the door rings. A new customer, of course. You chew quickly, swallow even faster, and adjust your dress so it looks less like you slept in it, though you did. The day has barely started, and already you're counting crumbs and rethinking your life choices. And you haven't even seen the priest yet. You're halfway through fixing your corset with one hand and picking breadcrumbs out of your sleeve with the other, when Gertrude lets out a long, dramatic sigh and announces, "Well, it's back." The room goes still. Marjorie chokes slightly on her onion. Beatrice mutters, "Third time this season," without looking up from her sewing. "The itch," Gertrude says, placing one hand on her hip and the other on her collarbone, like she's telling a tragic love story. It's come back stronger, like an angry ex with a torch and a confession. No one is surprised. Gertrude is a living warning, wrapped in too much makeup and risky choices. She swears it came from the foreign merchant she met last week, the one with fur-trimmed boots and strange jewelry. You're fairly sure it was the town scribe again. The madam appears in the doorway, holding her growing debt book and what might be a bottle of vinegar. "Cleaning stations are open," she announces, pointing to a dented tin basin and an old rag that's seen more than any rag should see. Gertrude walks over like she's in a parade and sits down with the confidence of someone who clearly isn't worried about her reputation. "At least it's not the pox," she says to no one in particular. "Like that time with the nobleman. Face like a statue, touch like a rash." Marjorie hands her a clove of garlic. "For healing," she mutters, though everyone knows it's mostly an excuse to cover the smell. You wisely keep your distance and avoid eye contact with the vinegar jug. So far, you've been fortunate, or maybe just careful, or both. Conversation carries on over the splashing sounds and Gertrude humming something far too cheerful for the situation. Someone mentions a rumor about a new establishment opening near the docks. "With real curtains," Beatrice whispers, eyes wide. For a brief moment, you all let yourselves dream. Curtains, actual beds with mattresses thicker than a pie crust, and patrons who don't fall asleep mid-sentence. Then reality sets back in. Gertrude lets out a yelp as the vinegar does its work. You wince. The madam rolls her eyes, and somewhere in the distance, a church bell tolls, as if even heaven is keeping count today. You grab your pouch, sigh, and ready yourself for the next visitor, hopefully one without too much jewelry. Just as you're about to claim a quiet moment, maybe a short rest, maybe a stolen bite of that bread crust from earlier, the front door creaks open. In steps the bishop's nephew. He always arrives the same way, nervously, clutching a flask of sacramental wine, wearing an expression of guilt usually reserved for tax collectors and dogs that just raided the dinner table. He's dressed in clerical gray, with a hood too big for his head, and shame written all over him. "Peace be with you," he mumbles, as if that makes his visit more acceptable. "And also with your coin." You answer with a polite smile. As always, he insists he's only here for confession. You nod like it's not the 12th time you've heard that. His version of confession involves wine, trembling hands, and a muddled explanation about Eve, temptation, and something about goats that you've never entirely understood and are too polite to question. Today, it's dried figs wrapped in linen and a half-hearted poem about salvation. You accept both politely. You are, after all, a woman with manners. You lead him toward the back room. He asks if you've been praying for him. You say yes, though you don't mention that most of those prayers were for him not to return. The visit itself is a familiar routine, overly apologetic, unexpectedly brief, and ending with his usual promise never to come back, a vow he typically breaks within 3 days. Afterward, he lies back, staring at the ceiling as though it might hand down divine wisdom. You offer him a sip from his own wine. He declines. You take it. One must keep hydrated. He tries to pay in silver, but the madam insists on coin from him in person, something to do with unpaid debts and ecclesiastical immunity. Instead, he leaves the figs, another prayer, and a small wooden cross. May God forgive us, he whispers at the door. You nod. By now, he has good reason to ask. On his way out, he collides with Gertrude, who greets him with a wink. He flushes, stammers, and bolts like he's just come face to face with a demon in lace stockings. You stash the figs for later. They might be stale, but they're not moldy, which counts as a victory. Now, time to air out the room and locate that garlic clove the merchant from last night mentioned returning, and you suspect he's bringing feathers. Once the bishop's nephew is gone, as though racing to make it to Judgment Day, you finally get a chance to sit. You settle by the hearth with your lukewarm ale, stretch your aching feet, and briefly entertain the idea of stealing Marjorie's garlic clove for your own protection. That's when Beatrice bursts in, holding a folded piece of parchment like it's the Magna Carta. It's for you, she says with a smirk, waving it dramatically. From your secret admirer. The word secret is doing a lot of heavy lifting here. There are only 6 men in town who can write, and 4 are married. One is the bishop. The last is the town scribe, the same man who once tried to impress you by reciting Latin and nearly fell into a chicken co-op. You open the parchment with the enthusiasm of someone unwrapping spoiled fish. It's written in what might be ink or be juice, and the handwriting is ambitious. Some letters are backwards. Others might not be letters at all. You begin to read aloud. Oh, fairest flame, thy hair is red like stew at night when all are fed. I dream of thee by candle's light, though rats do squeak and bites do bite. There's a pause. Beatrice wipes a tear from her eye, from laughter, not sentiment. You flip the parchment over, hoping for a punchline. There isn't one. Just a crude drawing that could be a heart or a potato with arrows. It's signed only, Your Knight of Quills. Poetic, until you remember the scribe once stabbed himself in the hand trying to sharpen a feather. Maybe he means well, Marjorie offers, peeking over your shoulder. Maybe. Or maybe he's just deeply, profoundly terrible at this. You consider keeping the poem, then consider using it to start the fire. The fire wins. You fold it neatly, shove it into the hearth, and watch it catch. Like most things in your life, it's briefly bright before vanishing into smoke. Still, a small part of you finds it oddly sweet. Not the poem. That was objectively awful, but the thought that someone considered you outside of business hours. You stare at the flames a moment longer. Then Gertrude walks in wearing someone's missing belt as a headband and asks, "You going to eat those figs or what?" Late afternoon arrives with the scent of sweat, overripe apples, and coin, which can only mean one thing: a merchant. He's dressed in velvet that's seen better decades, jangling with trinkets that scream midlife crisis by the sea route. His beard is oiled, his hat unnecessary, and his gaze lingers far too long on the chandelier that isn't there. He claims to have been everywhere: Alexandria, Genoa, even Paris, which he pronounces like a type of meat. His boots are muddy. His teeth are suspiciously white. And he smells like a man who bathes in perfume to hide something worse. He does not ask for company. He demands an experience. The word he uses is exotic. He doesn't elaborate. They never do. Surprise me, he says, a phrase that in your line of work ranks somewhere between a warning and a dare. You lead him to the back room, still faintly scented with the bishop's nephew's incense, and take mental stock. The prop trunk offers little. A few feathers, a cracked mask, and a scarf being held together by pure optimism. Nothing exactly screams exotic. Most of it barely whispers functional. So you improvise. The scarf becomes a veil. The cracked mask adds mystique. You light a candle and chant a nonsense phrase you once heard a drunk Hungarian mutter at a fair. It worked once before. He thought it was pagan. The merchant claps, delighted. You haven't even done anything yet. He asks to be tied up. You oblige. He requests honey. You offer molasses. He doesn't notice. He mumbles about forbidden fruit while you try not to laugh. At one point, he knocks over the chamber pot mid-theatrix but decides it's part of the ritual. The entire encounter is less passion and more performance art. When it's over, he tips generously, gold, not silver, which means you might finally have a meal that doesn't involve turnips. He bows, mutters something about spiritual awakening, and leaves with your cracked mask as a souvenir. You stare at the door for a moment, then turn back to the spilled chamber pot and the candle sputtering out. Exotic indeed. By now the sun is limping its way toward the horizon, dragging with it the unmistakable stench of the tannery next door, a thick, pungent blend of rotting flesh, urine, and crushed dreams. It's as if the air itself has given up and embraced decay. The tanning pits are only separated from your establishment by a shared alley and a moral boundary just as flimsy. You've mostly grown used to it. The smell clings to your skin like guilt, and no amount of lavender sprigs stuffed in your bodice can drive it away. Inside isn't much fresher. The common room reeks of sweat, spilled ale, and the kind of despair that can only be mopped up with hot vinegar and divine intervention. Gertrude is snoring on a bench. Beatrice is plucking lice from her bodice with the focus of a monk copying scripture. Marjorie is cleaning her teeth with the end of a quill. The quill might belong to your admirer. You don't ask. You retreat to your room, stepping over a puddle that might be water, probably not, and collapse onto the straw mattress, which groans louder than the client's. For a moment, you let yourself think, not about the day or the coins or the molasses still in your hair. You think about what you'll eat tonight. Bread, if the rats haven't claimed it. Maybe a boiled root. You consider heating water for tea. Then remember you used the last of the firewood 2 nights ago during an overly ambitious bath attempt. The walls are thin. Through them, you hear next door's conversation, a merchant arguing with a washerwoman about goats, or maybe debts. Possibly both. A dog barks in the distance. Then someone retches below your window. You wonder if it's the bishop's nephew again. You light a tallow candle and hold your fingers closed. Not for romance, but for warmth. Outside, the sky turns that bruised purple shade that always feels like the world is about to close for the night. And yet you're not done. The madam's voice echoes down the hall, sharp and unrelenting. Another one's coming. Of course he is. You stand, stretch your back, several joints protesting in unison, and reach for the wine-stained bodice. Showtime again. Night in a medieval brothel is when things truly come alive, by which we mean louder, stickier, and far more likely to end with someone throwing up on your shoes. The alehouse down the lane has just emptied into the streets, mostly drunk men, one bewildered goat, and a lute player with a black eye. They stagger toward your door like moths to a flame, if moths wore half-buttoned tunics and smelled like week-old onions. Inside, the air is thick with smoke, sweat, and the faint whiff of something burning. Could be a candle, could be dinner. No one checks. The madam is in full bark mode, directing traffic like a general on the losing side of a war. Gertrude has smeared more rouge on her cheeks than a noblewoman's corpse. Beatrice is passed out with her eyes open, an impressive skill. And you? You're at your post near the stairs, pretending to look mysterious instead of exhausted. Tonight's clientele is a glorious disaster. There's the toothless cooper who insists on singing before anything else. The apprentice mason who wants to practice kissing like the nobles do, which turns out to be mostly drooling and apologizing. And of course, the man who paid with a chicken last time and has returned to negotiate with eggs. You narrowly avoid the worst of them and end up with a blacksmith, muscles, manners, and the emotional depth of a door. Still, he pays up front and doesn't talk much. A win by local standards. The room is already hot when you lead him upstairs. The candle sputters, the mattress sags, and you mentally check out somewhere between boot removal and awkward compliments. Afterward, he falls asleep instantly. You nudge him with your toe. Nothing. He snores like a dying ox. You consider robbing him for sport, but settle for fishing out the rest of the coin and leaving before he rolls over and breaks your ribs. Downstairs, the music has devolved into shouting. Someone's playing dice with the madam's rent money. A fight breaks out over who gets the clean goblet. There isn't one. You take a breath, then cough. The night's just getting started. Just when you think it's peak, after the vomiting, the snapped lute string, and the man who thought tipping was optional if he winked, in walks a knight, or at least someone claiming to be one. His armor is mostly rust. His helmet is missing. He smells like he lost a joust to a pigsty. He has a sword, though dull, decorative, and possibly wooden, but he drags it behind him with all the gravitas of a man who definitely talks to it when no one's looking. He slams a coin purse on the counter and proclaims he wants to rescue a maiden. The madam, without missing a beat, points at you. You don't even blink. This isn't the weirdest request you've had this week. That honor still belongs to the beekeeper who wanted to be stung emotionally. You lead him upstairs. He insists on taking the stairs valiantly, which involves tripping twice and reciting half a poem that might be about horses. You nod politely, wondering if there's a saint for patience in this line of work. Inside the room, he demands a damsel in distress scenario. You oblige, sighing dramatically and pretending to be imprisoned in the corner. He rescues you by kicking over a stool and declaring victory. You clap. He bows. The show continues. Then comes the role play. He requests you call him Sir Gilbert the Moist, which you manage with a straight face only because you once had to call someone Captain Nipplehorn for 20 minutes. He recites more poetry, terrible, naturally, and insists on being gentle, despite your reminder that speed and silence are virtues at this hour. Eventually, things proceed. He's surprisingly nervous. You guide him as one might guide a lost sheep or a confused town official. Afterwards, he hands you a gold coin and a small pouch of herbs from his quest. You're 80% sure it's dried grass. He bows deeply and exits with a flourish, tripping one final time on the curtain. You sit for a moment in silence, then burst out laughing. Sometimes absurdity is the only thing standing between exhaustion and existential dread. The coin goes into your bodice. The herbs go out the window. The noise downstairs has finally dulled. The lute player is passed out, instrument cradled like a child. Gertrude lies face down on the hearth rug, possibly dreaming of bishops. Beatrice is upright but definitely unconscious. The madam counts coins and mutters curses in 3 languages. You recognize at least 2. Your room is quiet now, save for the slow drip from a ceiling leak. and the occasional creak of old wood regretting its life choices. You light the stub of your last candle, smelling faintly of animal fat and desperation, and set it on the table. The floor is cold. Your feet are sore. You remove your bodice with the care of someone diffusing a bomb and collapse onto the straw mattress that is both your closest friend and your worst enemy. Just as your eyes begin to close, there's a tiny squeak. Then another. Rats again. You sit up like a crusader hearing the word relic. Two beady eyes gleam from under your trunk. The one on the left has a scar. You've named him Robert. At this point, he's practically a tenant. You toss a stale crust across the room. Robert scurries after it, pride intact. His friend follows. You make a note to set another vinegar trap tomorrow, knowing it will fail like all the others. Downstairs, someone groans. Silence follows. You lean against the wall and exhale slowly. Your body feels centuries old. Your soul left about 4 clients ago. But there's a strange calm in this hour. The client's gone. The madness paused, the city holding its breath. You eat the last of the figs the bishop's nephew brought. They're dry, possibly older than you, but sweet. And yours. You lie back down. Pull the thin, fraying blanket over yourself. It's better than nothing. Tomorrow it starts again. But for now, you let your eyes close. Even a medieval prostitute gets a few hours of peace, assuming the rats don't start a duel. At last, sleep comes. Not gently, not gracefully, but like a sack of flour to the head. Your body gives out before your mind finishes listing everything that aches. Your dreams, as always, are absurd. You're in a castle, clean somehow, wrapped in silk, reclining on a bed that doesn't crunch when you move. There are grapes. There's music. A man with all his teeth is reciting poetry that doesn't rhyme love with dove. You sip wine that doesn't taste like boiled socks. It's bliss. And then, naturally, someone starts screaming. You jolt awake, smacking your head on the low beam above your straw mattress, the same one you forget exists every single night. You curse under your breath, already knowing the culprit before your eyes even focus. Gertrude again. She's outside your door, arguing with the madam. Something about a nobleman, a missing shoe, and an accusation involving 2 ducks in a chamber pot. You try to ignore it. You bury your face in the straw, which rewards you with a noseful of hay and something that might be a beetle. The screaming continues, followed by a crash. Then someone yells, "You said you were barren." Ah, so it's that kind of night. You sit up, heart pounding like you've just survived a siege. You consider going back to sleep, but the odds of that rank somewhere between unlikely and only if someone hits you with a loop. The candle is out. The air is cold. Somewhere in the darkness, Robert the Rat is chewing something that sounds suspiciously like fabric. Probably your good shift. You wrap yourself in your cloak, more patch than cloth, and poke your head into the hallway. Beatrice is sitting cross-legged at the far end, eating a turnip like it's an apple and watching the chaos unfold with the concern of a cow chewing cud. "I give it 5 more minutes," she says, gesturing toward the brawl. Someone gets slapped with a candlestick. You nod, sigh, and retreat to your bed. Dreams are clearly off the menu tonight. But if you're lucky, the madness will quiet soon. And maybe, just maybe, Robert will leave your sock alone. Dawn peeks through the shutters like a nosy neighbor with terrible timing. It's not golden or gentle. It's gray, cold, and smells faintly of mildew and regret. You sit up slowly, because moving too quickly might remind your spine that it's been used as a springboard by a merchant with no rhythm. The straw mattress has left another series of lines across your cheek, medieval embroidery courtesy of poverty. The hallway is quiet now. No more screaming. No more duck-related allegations. Just the muffled sound of someone snoring in the pantry and the distant splash of a chamber pot being emptied into the alley. The tanners are already at work. The stench wafts in politely uninvited. Time to clean. The back room is a battlefield. The sheets are in a state of emergency. The candle wax has dripped into someone's boot, and the only thing that smells worse than the bed is the pillow. There's a single coin wedged in a floorboard crack. Your tip from Sir Gilbert the Moist, who apparently thought subtlety involved hiding his money like a squirrel. You gather the linens and haul them downstairs to the washtub where Marjorie is already elbow deep in misery. She's humming a folk song about drowning a cheating husband. You respect the theme. The water is cold. You scrub like a woman trying to erase memories, not stains. The wine from the bishop's nephew is clinging to the fabric like sin. Someone's lost earring floats to the top. It's not yours. You pocket it anyway. Beatrice wanders by with a broom and a look that says she's mentally on a ship to Venice. The madam is tallying up last night's earnings, muttering curses at the ink that won't flow, or perhaps just at life in general. Someone's burned breakfast again. The bread is hard enough to qualify as a weapon. By the time you're done scrubbing, your fingers are numb and your soul has officially detached for a brief vacation. You hang the linens on a line that's seen more flapping than a flock of pigeons during mating season. The sun rises higher. The city begins to stir. Another day looms. You look at the beds, now cleanish. The floor is mostly sweat. Your face in a cracked mirror, same as always. Ready or not, the door will open again soon, and someone will ask for something exotic. The linens are hung, the floor swept, and your hands smell faintly of lie and disappointment. The sun is officially up now, which means the real work, the pretending, the smiling, the endless parade of men who think calling you "milady" makes it romantic is just around the corner. You slept for maybe 2 hours. Your hair is a bird's nest. Your back aches like you've been trampled by a particularly clumsy mule, but you're upright. Your bodice is mostly laced, and you found a cleanish scarf to tie around your hair. That's what passes for winning here. Outside, the market stalls are opening. You hear the butchers yelling about kidneys, the fishmonger cursing at a cat, and the sound of hooves clattering down the cobblestones. Life in the city continues, oblivious, chaotic, and oddly comforting in its predictability. Inside, the brothel smells like stale beer, candle wax, and a lemon peel someone shoved in a corner to trick the nose. The madam is barking orders with the energy of someone who's had too much vinegar and not enough sleep. Gertrude is snoring in a chair, head tilted at an angle that suggests mild possession. Beatrice is poking at her latest flea bite like it personally insulted her. You eat a crust of bread with hard cheese and a fig that's seen better centuries. You sip something warm that might be tea or might be yesterday's water reheated with hope. It burns your throat. You drink it anyway. And then you do the one thing they never expect from a woman like you. You laugh. Just once, quiet and sharp, at the absurdity of it all. At the bishop's nephew and the knight in muddy armor. At the merchant with molasses and the man who paid you in poultry. At Robert the Rat and your poem that caught fire. Because somehow, you're still here. Still standing. Still surviving. Still finding a way to keep going, even if that means wringing out sheets, dodging drunken serenades, and pretending you're exotic for men who can't spell the word. You tie your scarf tighter, square your shoulders, and head toward the door. It's a new day, and someone somewhere is about to make a very weird request. You'll be ready. In the ancient Persian world, scent was far more than personal indulgence. It was spiritual alchemy. To walk into a Persian garden or palace was to enter a world saturated with fragrance. The very air was considered sacred, so the Persians made sure it carried the scent of roses, saffron, jasmine, and myrrh. They believed that a beautiful aroma was the signature of paradise, and earth was only tolerable when it mimicked heaven. Perfume in Persia wasn't just warm, it was lived. Bathhouses were infused with rosewater steam. Mosques were sprinkled with incense before prayers. Even letters between lovers might be dusted with powdered ambergris or sprayed with attar, leaving a sensual whisper behind. This wasn't vanity, it was philosophy. Persians believed the soul was shaped by what the body absorbed, and scent was part of that nourishment. A good aroma could calm the nerves, inspire poetry, or even draw the attention of angels. A foul smell, meanwhile, was more than unpleasant. It was seen as a moral failing, long before the French bottled Chanel No. 5. The Persians had perfected the science of distillation. They didn't just crush flowers and hope for the best. They engineered early alembic stills, devices that used heat and condensation to pull the very essence from plants. The man credited with refining this process was Avicenna, the great Persian polymath, whose method for extracting rose essence became the foundation of modern perfumery. But fragrance wasn't reserved for royalty or scholars. Street vendors sold tiny vials of rose oil and orange blossom water. Traveling merchants carried musk from Tibet, frankincense from Arabia, and saffron from Khorasan. It was an entire economy built on the belief that beauty and scent were not luxuries, but necessities for a balanced life. In Persia, fragrance wasn't an accessory, it was identity. It announced your arrival, lingered after your departure, and spoke to both the living and the divine. If one scent defines Persian perfumery, it is the Damascus rose. Cultivated for centuries in the cool mountain air, it was treasured for its depth and sweetness. But Persians weren't content to simply crush petals against the skin. They wanted the flower's pure soul. That pursuit led to steam distillation, a 10th century breakthrough by Avicenna himself. His method was simple in principle, but precise in execution. Fresh rose petals were gently heated with water, releasing aromatic vapors. Those vapors condensed into a fragrant liquid, rose water, or golab, which became one of Persia's most prized exports. Golab wasn't only for the body. It perfumed homes, flavored dishes, was poured into fountains, and offered to honored guests as a sign of welcome. It cooled the skin, refreshed the spirit, and was believed to protect against illness, both physical and spiritual. In Sufi mysticism, rose water symbolized divine love, its use in ritual cleansing echoing this sacred meaning. And rose was only the beginning. The same technique captured the essence of orange blossom, jasmine, lavender, and even bitter herbs, each crafted with the same aim to stir the heart, lift the spirit, and restore harmony to the body. It was work bound to the rhythm of nature. Roses had to be harvested at dawn, when the air was cool and the petals richest with oil. The result was not just a fragrance, but a piece of the Persian soul bottled. Workers, often entire families, would rise before dawn to gather rose blossoms by hand, their fingers brushing dew from the petals. Within hours, the harvest was loaded into great copper stills. The distillation that followed was slow and deliberate, more sacred than industrial, as if each drop captured the soul of the flower. Cities like Kashan, Shiraz, and Isfahan became legendary for their master perfumers. Travelers came from India, Byzantium, and the Arab world to witness the famed rose festivals and to buy pure adders. Some swore that a single drop of Persian rose oil on silk could hold its fragrance for decades. The Persians didn't just bottle scent, they bottled emotion, memory, and beauty itself. For them, fragrance was not merely pleasure, but prayer. From royal ceremonies to the quiet moments of daily life, scent shaped rituals both sacred and secular. In a Persian home, the air was rarely still. A faint haze of oud smoke, frankincense, or myrrh curled through the rooms like invisible silk. This wasn't for show, it was believed that beautiful aromas could attract divine favor and drive away evil. In Zoroastrianism, the ancient faith of Persia, fragrance was an offering to Ahura Mazda, the supreme god. Fires burned constantly in temples, not only for warmth and light, but for purification. Priests would cast bundles of sandalwood, thyme, and storax resin into the flames, sanctifying the air and carrying prayers upward in scented smoke. The rising fragrance was thought to be a holy vessel, delivering words to the divine. When Islam flourished in Persia, the love of fragrance only deepened. The Prophet Muhammad praised perfume as one of life's blessings, and Persian scholars and merchants became renowned for their incense blends. Mosques were perfumed before Friday prayers, and wearing fragrance became both a spiritual practice and a social courtesy. These rituals of scent extended into every stage of life. Births were celebrated with rose water. Weddings bloomed with the aroma of orange blossoms. The dead were wrapped in shrouds infused with musk and sandalwood. Even books and prayer beads were sometimes anointed with delicate oils, because in Persian thought, every object, no matter how humble, deserved a touch of paradise. The art of burning buckwort, incense, was often a family tradition. Women, in particular, guarded their own secret recipes of woods, resins, and spices. Each blend had a purpose: to calm the mind, attract a lover, or cleanse away misfortune. These were more than perfumes. They were intentions, drifting through the air like invisible prayers. Whether it was rose water sprinkled at dawn or sacred smoke drifting through a twilight courtyard, the Persians didn't just live with scent, they wove it into the very fabric of time. In the courts of Persian kings, perfume was far more than elegance. It was politics, a language of power, refinement, and prestige, carefully crafted to impress, seduce, and intimidate. The royal palaces of dynasties like the Achaemenids, Sassanids, and later the Safavids were steeped in fragrance by design, not accident. Silk drapes were perfumed, floors were sprinkled with rose water, and even the ink in royal decrees might be scented with saffron or sandalwood. For a Persian Shah, smelling exquisite wasn't a luxury, it was a statement. His body, clothing, and even the cushions on his throne had to exude divinity. To his subjects, scent revealed a ruler's moral character. A fragrant king was blessed by the heavens, a foul-smelling one surely cursed. Royal perfumers were among the most esteemed members of the court. They were not mere apothecaries, but chemists, poets, and trusted confidants, working behind thick velvet curtains surrounded by crushed petals, copper stills, and scrolls of ancient formulas. Their task was to compose signature scents for each royal, subtle enough to feel natural, yet powerful enough to leave a lasting impression after a single meeting. Courtly perfumes used rare treasures: ambergris from the sea, civet from wild cats, oud from algarwood trees, and musk from Himalayan deer. These were blended with floral waters, herbs, and spices into rich adders and delicate oils, stored in jewel-encrusted bottles hidden like royal treasures. Perfume was also a diplomatic weapon. Persian envoys would present foreign rulers with vials of exotic scents, wrapped in silk and tied with golden thread, a gift that whispered of sophistication and quiet dominance. Here, it seemed to say, is the scent of civilization. The crown jewel of court fragrance was the Rose Festival of Kashan. At dawn, court ladies would walk through vast rose fields, gathering fresh blooms for distillation. The rose water from this ceremony was reserved for the royal household, and a single vial could be worth more than gold. In court life, fragrance didn't just sweeten the air, it defined identity, displayed power, and cloaked ambition in the delicate veil of flowers. In Persian poetry and romance, Scent was the first kiss. A lover's presence was often known before they spoke, carried ahead on a trail of jasmine, rose, or amber that lingered like a secret. In a culture where modesty restrained touch, perfume became the most intimate language of desire. Lovers exchanged vials of scent as others exchanged rings or letters, tokens that held the warmth of a memory in every drop. A single drop behind the ear, on the wrist, or tucked within the folds of a veil could speak volumes. Women often wore oud or jasmine oil beneath their hair, so every turn of the head released a gentle aura. Men rubbed sandalwood paste into their beards, believing it made them both irresistible and respectable. But fragrance wasn't only for romance, it was preparation. Persian bathhouses, or hammams, were stages for transformation. After hours of scrubbing, steaming, and exfoliating, men and women would step into cool rooms where attendants massaged fragrant oils into their skin with slow, rhythmic movements. Rose oil softened, civet added mystery, and clove with cardamom warmed the blood. Poets like Hafez and Rumi wove perfume into their verses. A beloved wasn't just beautiful, she was sweeter than musk. So fragrant the rose bowed before her. To smell a lover's scarf long after they'd gone was a holy kind of longing. In many tales, it was the memory of a scent, not a kiss or a glance, that haunted the heart. The seduction extended to clothing. Robes were perfumed using a method called gilaf, where garments were placed in wooden trunks filled with scented smoke, releasing their aroma slowly, like a whisper at close range. Even letters carried fragrance, sealed with wax melted over rose water or with dried jasmine tucked between the folds. In a society where virtue and discretion were prized, perfume became a loophole, a way to be bold without breaking the rules. Skin couldn't be shown, but a lingering fragrance could stir every imagination. And in that invisible trail, love bloomed, intoxicating, unforgettable. Behind every memorable Persian scent was a master of the unseen, the perfumer known as Adder. These artisans were not mere merchants, but chemists, herbalists, and poets, passing their knowledge down like a family heirloom. Their workshops, hidden behind bazaars or nestled in garden courtyards, were crowded with tiny bottles, copper stills, and the warm, mingled aromas of 100 ingredients. To be a Persian perfumer required obsession. There was no fixed formula, only instinct, trial, and centuries of inherited wisdom. Each ingredient had its own temperament. Jasmine was shy, best blended at night. Saffron was temperamental, demanding perfect balance. Musk was the troublemaker, potent, erotic, and expensive enough to spark palace intrigue. And Adder's shelves held hundreds of bottles, some cloudy, some glowing gold, others nearly black, filled with rose, orange blossom, myrrh, cardamom, vetiver, coriander, and even unusual extracts like pomegranate skin or burnt almond shell. Each was labeled in delicate Persian script with notes like good for the heart, for joy, or to attract the beloved. Creating a perfume was a ritual as much as a recipe. The perfumer might begin with a deep, grounding base like oud, then layer floral or spicy middle notes, slowly building a scent like a poet composing a verse. The final flourish in a Persian perfume was the top note, a bright, fleeting spark meant to dazzle in the first breath. A twist of citrus peel, a brush of mint, maybe the green shimmer of crushed basil. These recipes were never written down. They lived in muscle memory, in the nose, in the fingertips of the adder, as intimate as a lullaby learned in childhood. Sometimes, the work was purely personal. Nobles, poets, and lovers would commission custom scents to suit their moods, the season, or the ache in their hearts. Make me a perfume for forgetting, one might say. Or, I want to smell like spring on the edge of a storm. The adder would simply nod, slip behind a curtain, and begin the quiet alchemy, measuring not in teaspoons, but in heartbeats. The finished perfume was never just a smell. It was a distilled feeling, bottled, refined, and immortal. One drop could shift the air in a room. One whiff could stir longing in the soul. Beauty fades, gold tarnishes, but a well-crafted scent could outlast both. Step into a Persian bazaar and your senses would be seized at once, by color, by sound, but most of all by fragrance. The air was a tapestry of rose, clove, smoke, and sun-warmed resins. Perfume merchants tucked between spice stalls and apothecaries displayed shelves of glass flasks in jewel tones, amber, ruby, pale gold. These weren't sealed bottles with brand labels. They were open to the air, inviting you to lean in, to touch, to test. Sampling was its own small ritual. The merchant might dab rose oil onto your wrist, wave a fan gently over your skin, and watch for that flicker in your eyes. Bargaining, too, had its etiquette. You didn't haggle like you would for dates or rugs. You conversed. You discussed provenance, purity, seasonality, and mood. This one, the merchant might say, smells like the night after rain, or fit for a queen on her wedding day. You weren't just buying scent, you were buying a story. Certain cities were fragrant capitals. Kashan was famed for its rose water, distilled with a reverence that bordered on the sacred. Shiraz offered the heady marriage of orange blossom and wild herbs. Isfahan's perfumers were the bold innovators, pairing oud with dried apricot or cinnamon bark with violet. Pride ran deep. Ours is the purest, a merchant might declare, not watered down like those charlatans in Samarkand. Travelers carried these boasts home in letters, and medieval chroniclers from Arabia to Europe described the perfume markets as dreamlike, places where fragrances were weighed like gold. For locals, the bazaar wasn't just commerce, it was a weekly pilgrimage. Elders sought grounding woody oils. Young men chose fiery spice blends to impress. Brides to be stocked up on jasmine and rose. In the middle of the market's chaos, there was always a pause. A drop on the wrist, a deep breath in, and for a heartbeat the world smelled like heaven. And while the bazaars told the sensual story of perfume, Persia's deeper legacy was scientific. Long before fragrance was bottled in glossy boutiques, Persian scholars were treating scent as chemistry, melding art, alchemy, and early pharmacology into a discipline that would shape perfumery for centuries. In the medieval Islamic Golden Age, some of the era's most brilliant minds were not only physicians, astronomers, or philosophers, they were also perfumers. Chief among them was Avicenna ibn Sina, the legendary Persian polymath of the 10th and 11th centuries. His innovations in steam distillation, especially his work with rose petals, shaped the foundation of modern essential oil extraction. For Avicenna, fragrance was never a mere indulgence. It was medicine. Rose water could ease headaches. Saffron-based aiders were believed to lift the spirit from melancholy. Musk was prescribed to quicken the heartbeat. These were not casual folk remedies, but studied treatments, recorded in texts that traveled from Persia across the Islamic world and into medieval Europe. The Persian term for alchemy, alchemia, meant transforming one substance into another. In perfumery, this transformation was as spiritual as it was chemical. To take a basket of petals and distill it into a drop of oil was, in its own way, a small miracle. Early scientists approached it with the same reverence they gave to turning lead into gold. Perfume laboratories, often attached to madrasas or hospitals, became centers of both healing and artistry. Inside, glassware curved like miniature palaces. Alembics for distillation, filters for purification, flasks for storage. Students learned to chart the boiling points of herbs, measure the volatility of spices, and explore the solvent powers of different oils. They discovered which scents vanished quickly citrus, mint, green herbs, and which lingered for hours, amber, oud, sandalwood. This knowledge eventually crystallized into a system still used today, the pyramid of top, middle, and base notes. Yet science did not strip perfume of its soul, it refined it. Scholars wrote of fragrance's power to clear the mind before prayer, to harmonize body and spirit. Kings and viziers patronized these experiments, eager to unite luxury with discovery. Through this fusion of reason and romance, Persia gave the world something rare, a tradition where perfume was not frivolous, not merely feminine, but formidable, standing at the crossroads of medicine, mysticism, and mathematics. Every drop of attar was a distillation not only of flowers, but of centuries of thought. Empires rose and fell, but the Persian perfume tradition clung to the wind. Born in gardens, perfected in royal courts, refined in laboratories, it lingers still, not just in the Middle East, but across the globe. Its fingerprints can be found in luxury French perfumery and in the small attar stalls of South Asia. If a bottle contains rose, oud, jasmine, or saffron, there is a good chance it carries a whisper of Persian heritage. The techniques Persian artisans perfected, steam distillation, scent layering, oil blending, became the backbone of modern perfumery. Western scholars translated Persian treatises on botany and alchemy. Avicenna's rosewater method was imitated in Italy, France, and eventually by the global cosmetics industry. Even today's niche perfumers borrow from these traditions, describing their creations as inspired by Shiraz or blended in the manner of ancient Persia. But the legacy is not just technical, it is emotional. The Persian view of fragrance as prayer, poetry, and identity endures. In Iran today, guests are still welcomed with rose water. Prayer mats are perfumed. New clothes are scented before weddings. The bazaar still sells golden-capped bottles of attar, each tied to memory, mood, and meaning, a reminder that in Persian culture, scent is never just smell. It is lived. You can still find artisans in Kashan who rise before dawn to gather damask roses, their hands repeating the same gentle motions their ancestors perfected 1,000 years ago. Every spring, the Golab Jiri festival transforms the town into a living museum of scent, drawing thousands who come to watch the steam rise from copper stills and to breathe in the perfume of freshly crushed petals. It is more than a tourist event. It is the heartbeat of a heritage that treats fragrance not as a commodity, but as an art form. Even far from Iran, in diaspora communities from Los Angeles to Berlin, these traditions breathe on. In Persian homes, perfume is a kind of storytelling. A grandmother dabbing rose water behind her ears, a mother misting orange blossom before a celebration, a child learning, almost without realizing, that to smell beautiful is to be ready for joy, for prayer, for life. Persia's perfume legacy isn't just bottled, it's breathed, passed from hand to hand, heart to heart. Like a drop of attar on silk, it lingers, subtle, seductive, sacred, eternal. Before the baptismal waters of 988 CE, before cathedrals rose and icons glowed in candlelight, the people of Kiev and Rus lived in a world ruled by wind, fire, and the whispering gods of nature. Their faith was not written in holy books, but remembered in songs, carved into wooden idols, and carried in the rustle of leaves. Every force had a name and a will. Perun, god of thunder and war, whose lightning split the sky. The earth itself, a watchful mother spirit. The forests, alive with creatures, some protective, others punishing. This paganism was no loose superstition. It was structured, sacred, and local, with each tribe honoring its own guardians. Yet some gods were universal. Perun stood at the top, especially revered by warriors. Gazbog, the sun god, brought warmth, life, and abundance. Veles, master of cattle commerce and the underworld, was the patron of farmers and traders. These gods lived not in marble temples, but in sacred groves, beside rivers, and in carved idols set on hills or crossroads. Rituals were raw and immediate: feasts, music, and sacrifices, sometimes of animals, and, in darker whispers, of humans. When Prince Vladimir seized power in the late 10th century, he embraced this old religion with zeal. Seeking unity for his diverse realm, he built a grand pagan pantheon on a hill in Kiev, placing Perun at its center. Offerings were made, ceremonies held, and for a time Vladimir used the gods as a tool of statecraft. But paganism, for all its fervor, was fractured, too tribal, too decentralized. Worse, it left Kiev and Rus looking primitive to the great powers of the age: Byzantium, the Islamic caliphates, and the Christian kingdoms of the West. If Vladimir wanted legitimacy, powerful allies, and prestige, the old gods of thunder and cattle would not be enough. As his people danced in the fields and sang to Perun, the prince began to cast his gaze outward, toward the mighty faiths of neighboring empires, and to wonder whether the time had come to trade the gods of his fathers for a new vision of divinity. Vladimir, long before sainthood, was the archetype of the pagan prince: bold, ruthless, and endlessly hungry for power and pleasure. The youngest son of Sviatoslav, a battle-hardened ruler, he was never the heir apparent. His early life was spent in the northern stronghold of Novgorod, a city of merchants and marauders, where he learned to balance the ledger and the sword. When his father died, the fragile balance of Kiev and Rus shattered into civil war. Outmaneuvered, Vladimir fled into exile across the Baltic, only to return at the head of a warband of Norse mercenaries, steel-clad men who fought for silver, not loyalty. By 980 CE, he had seized Kiev in a blaze of blood and fire, crowning himself Grand Prince. He ruled with the swagger of a god-king. Idols to Perun towered over the city. Sacrifices were made to keep the skies and the harvest in favor. His palace swelled with wives, concubines, and children, so many that medieval chroniclers didn't bother counting. They didn't dress his reputation in courtly myths. They simply called him lascivious. Yet beneath the feasts and the thunder god rituals was a mind as calculating as it was carnal. Vladimir knew his patchwork realm of Slavic tribes sat at the crossroads of empires, and in their shadow. To the south, Byzantium saw the Rus as barbarians. To the east, the Volga Bulgars, newly Islamic, were spreading influence with merchants and missionaries. To the west, Latin Christendom waited with both open hands and sharpened knives. Vladimir understood what many of his people did not. Religion was politics by other means. Faith shaped alliances, literacy, law, and legitimacy. Paganism gave him no scripture, no clergy, no unifying moral code, only tribal loyalties and local customs. But the great religions, Christianity, Islam, Judaism, came with institutions, bureaucracies, and the imprimatur of civilization. So in the middle of his reign, this warrior prince began to reinvent himself, not out of guilt or spiritual awakening, but out of ambition. He started weighing the gods like a merchant appraising fine goods. He didn't seek conversion for salvation of the soul. He sought it as a tool of empire. In Vladimir's world, faith was not a miracle, it was a treaty, a seal, and a throne. Carefully, cynically, and with the precision of a man negotiating a trade deal rather than a covenant with God, Vladimir set about choosing the new faith of Kiev and Rus. By 986, he had made up his mind to shop around. If his realm was to be more than a patchwork of pagan tribes, it needed a spiritual brand the great powers would recognize and respect. According to the primary chronicle, He sent envoys on what was essentially a diplomatic tasting tour of the world's major religions. Their first stop, Islam, as practiced by the Volga Bulgars to the east. The creed was disciplined, monotheistic, and influential. But there was a fatal flaw. No wine. The envoys reported. For Vladimir, who measured joy in goblets, that was a deal breaker. Drinking is the joy of the Rus. We cannot exist without it. He is said to have replied. Islam was out. Next came the Latin Christians of Germany. Their faith had authority. Their priests had order, but the ceremonies, dull. The envoys concluded. We saw no beauty there. Then they visited the Khazars, followers of Judaism. The theology intrigued Vladimir, but the lack of a homeland struck him as ominous. If your God has rejected you, how can I worship him? He asked. It wasn't until the envoys reached Constantinople that everything changed. There, inside the Hagia Sophia, they witnessed the full spectacle of the Eastern Orthodox liturgy. Gold mosaics glittering in the candlelight, incense curling toward the vaulted dome, choirs echoing like voices from another world. We did not know whether we were in heaven or on earth, they reported. Their God dwells among men. This was not merely faith. It was empire draped in divine robes. For Vladimir, orthodoxy offered what paganism never could: imperial legitimacy, political alliances, and a place in the hierarchy of civilized states. He was ready to commit, but only if the deal came with one final clause. He wanted a Byzantine princess, and not just any princess. His choice was Anna Porphyrogenita, sister to the reigning emperors Basil II and Constantine VIII, and a woman literally born in the purple, imperial from cradle to crown. Marrying her would make him not just a Christian prince, but kin to the mightiest dynasty in the East. Vladimir had chosen his God, but as always, he made sure the bargain came with dividends. There was just one problem. Anna Porphyrogenita was untouchable. Byzantine princesses did not marry foreign rulers, ever. They were reserved for emperors, and sometimes even those proposals were turned down. To Constantinople's court, Kievan Rus was still a land of axe-swinging pagans, rich in furs and muscle, but poor in manners. Vladimir's request was met with a polite but firm no. So, in what can only be described as early medieval negotiation tactics, Vladimir responded by launching a military campaign. In 988 CE, his forces swept into Crimea and besieged the Byzantine outpost of Chersonesus near modern-day Sevastopol. The fighting was harsh, the outcome decisive. The city was his. With that, Vladimir sent a very clear message to the emperors in Constantinople. Give me the princess, and I'll give you your city back. It worked. The Byzantines were in trouble, facing a rebellion at home and badly in need of military reinforcements. They agreed, but with one condition. Vladimir had to be baptized first. He accepted. The baptism was no quiet affair in Kiev. It happened right there in Chersonesus, the city he had just taken. The primary chronicle claims it was miraculous. Vladimir regained his sight, renounced his concubines, and embraced monogamy. History, however, might be forgiven for raising an eyebrow. This was, after all, the same man who once decorated a pagan shrine with human skulls. Still, the symbolism was powerful. The pagan warlord had been remade into a Christian prince under the blessing of the Orthodox Church. Soon after, Anna arrived, and they were married, an alliance of not just two people, but two realms. With one marriage, Vladimir bound Kievan Rus to the prestige and authority of the Byzantine Empire. Christianity, for him, was never just salvation. It was a geopolitical weapon, and he had just wielded it flawlessly. But baptizing himself was the easy part. Now came the real war, converting the entire population of Kievan Rus, most of whom had no interest in abandoning their old gods. The Slavs had worshipped Perun, Dashbog, and a host of other deities for generations. Temples crowned the hills, rituals were stitched into the fabric of everyday life, and religion was inseparable from tribal identity. Vladimir wasn't about to debate theology, he issued orders. The grand idols in Kiev were to be destroyed. The most famous victim was Perun, the thunder god. His statue was tied with ropes, beaten by soldiers, and dragged ignominiously through the streets before being hurled into the Dnieper River. That same river would now serve as the centerpiece of the new faith. According to the primary chronicle, Vladimir summoned every man, woman, and child of Kiev to its banks. There, in the waters of the Dnieper, the old gods were washed away in a mass baptism that would mark one of the most dramatic religious transformations in medieval Europe. It wasn't an invitation, it was an order. On the banks of the Dnieper, priests stood ready, icons held high, their chants rising over the crowd. Thousands of citizens, some curious, many reluctant, were herded into the cold water. This was no personal awakening. It was a state decree made flesh. For most, it was their first taste of Christian ritual, and it came as icy river water and unfamiliar hymns. Yet, something irreversible happened that day. Whether out of fear, awe, or simple submission to the moment, the people went under. The Dnieper, once the artery of trade and travel, became the baptismal font for an entire civilization. From Kiev, the wave of conversion rolled outward. Novgorod, Suzdal, Smolensk, city after city saw the same mass baptisms. Resistance flared in places, but more often, people simply obeyed. Pagan temples were torn down, crosses erected, and wooden churches sprang up almost overnight. The transition was not gentle, but it was final. In one generation, the Slavic spiritual map was redrawn, from gods of earth and sky to saints and incense. But official decrees and smashed idols could not erase centuries of belief. The old gods still lingered, in forest groves, in the whispers of elders, in the stories told around village fires. Household spirits, the domovoi, were still said to guard family hearts. The Rusalka still haunted rivers in local lore. Perun, stripped of his shrine, was still feared when thunder rolled. The church might have baptized the people's bodies, but their minds still followed the old rhythms. And here, the Orthodox clergy proved pragmatic. They didn't try to wipe out paganism completely. They absorbed it. The pagan calendar was given Christian meaning. Fertility rites, solstice fires, and harvest festivals were renamed and rededicated. Spring celebrations became Easter. Winter feasts became Christmas. Slavic gods were replaced with saints who bore suspiciously familiar traits. It was a clever compromise. By wrapping the old ways in the new faith symbols, the church avoided shattering the fragile unity Vladimir had built, transforming Kiev and Rus not by erasing its past, but by folding it into its future. A fertility charm became a prayer to the Virgin Mary. A thunder offering turned into a candle lit for Saint Elijah, a Christian stand-in for Perun himself. Out of this blending, folk Christianity was born, an enduring mix of Orthodox faith and ancestral tradition. In the villages, peasants still buried bread in the earth for a good harvest, even as they crossed themselves and prayed. Holy wells were still visited, offerings left for unseen spirits. Crosses were worn alongside ancient amulets. For the church, this merging of old and new was both a frustration and a triumph. Christianity had survived in Kiev and Rus not by wiping the pagan world away, but by growing over it, like vines curling around a fallen statue. The old gods hadn't been erased. They'd simply changed their clothes. After the Dnieper baptisms and the smashing of idols, Vladimir's vision went beyond religion. He wanted Kiev itself to mirror the splendor of his new ally, Byzantium. If Rus was to be Christian, it would not be in name alone. It would be grand, imperial, and unmistakably orthodox. Byzantine clergy, architects, and artisans streamed into Kiev, carrying scrolls, relics, sacred art, and chants. Wooden shrines gave way to stone churches, the greatest being the Church of the Tithes, built with imported Byzantine materials and consecrated with the pomp of Constantinople's rituals. It was the first stone church in Rus, a bold declaration that Kiev was no longer a rough frontier, it was a second Constantinople. With these sacred buildings came a flood of knowledge. Greek texts were translated into Old Church Slavonic. The Cyrillic alphabet, crafted earlier by Saints Cyril and Methodius for the Slavs, was fully embraced, laying the groundwork for literacy, record-keeping, and theology in the local tongue. Monasteries appeared, serving not just as houses of worship, but as centers of learning, art, and political influence. Schools were built to train a new elite of clerics, scribes, and administrators, people who could operate in both the spiritual and political worlds. Orthodox Christianity's structure, hierarchical, ceremonial, centralized, suited Vladimir's goal of uniting a vast, diverse land. Adopting Byzantine religious customs, court etiquette, and even fashion reshaped Rus's image. No longer was it a barbaric outpost, it was now a recognized power. Constantinople had lent its prestige, and Kiev wore it with pride. Icons replaced totems. Processions replaced pagan dances. Incense filled the air where once the smoke of sacrifices rose. The same people who once circled idols now marched in liturgical ceremonies, chanting hymns they barely understood, but were slowly making their own. By the time Vladimir the Great died in 1015, his legacy had been remade. No longer remembered simply as a pagan warlord with many wives, he was transformed in both image and memory, eventually canonized as Saint Vladimir, equal to the apostles. Behind the incense and holy icons stood a man who had pulled off one of the most calculated political transformations in medieval history. Vladimir didn't just accept Christianity, he wielded it as a tool, a binding agent, and a banner under which to unite his realm. His baptism brought an immediate sense of order. The once fragmented Slavic tribes of Rus began to see themselves not only as kin by blood, but as members of a shared faith bound by common rituals. Clergy now stood alongside generals in governance. Monasteries became early centers of administration. The Byzantine idea of the ruler as God's chosen representative slowly took root, elevating the prince's role from warlord to divinely ordained leader. Vladimir's children inherited more than his throne. His son, Yaroslav the Wise, expanded on his father's foundation, turning Kiev into a hub of law, culture, and diplomacy. He commissioned the first written legal code, oversaw the building of more churches, and strengthened ties with Western Europe through marriage alliances. None of this would have been possible without the Christian identity Vladimir had cemented. His canonization served both heaven and earth. Spiritually, he was cast as the ideal ruler. Politically, he was the sainted founder every dynasty needed. His early life, filled with pagan idols and a harem of concubines, was conveniently overshadowed by the image of the man who burned idols, built churches, and baptized a nation. For future rulers, Vladimir's path became a clear model. Align with religion to legitimize power, use faith to unify, and cloak ambition in sacred robes. The formula worked, not only for Vladimir, but for his descendants all the way to the Tsars of Muscovy. His sainthood was not earned solely in heaven, it was crafted on earth. The pagan prince became the Christian patriarch, the ruthless ruler, a religious icon. In doing so, Vladimir ensured his name would resound through prayers, chronicles, and legends for centuries. The Christianization of Kiev and Rus in 988 was more than a single mass baptism. It marked the beginning of a centuries-long bond between faith and power that would shape not just Rus, but the entire Eastern Slavic world. Vladimir had planted the seed, and from it grew a spiritual empire far more enduring than his political one. The Orthodox Church became more than a place of worship. It became the very soul of the state. Bishops advised princes, monasteries amassed land, trained scribes, and preserved the chronicles of history. Religious processions replaced tribal rituals, and war banners now bore crosses instead of animal totems. To be civilized in Rus came to mean being Christian, patterned after the grandeur of Orthodox centers like Constantinople. But this deep bond between church and state came with a price. The church relied on princes for protection, while princes used the church to legitimize their rule. There was no separation, only a partnership. Princes appointed bishops, funded monasteries, and in return were upheld as God's chosen, just like Vladimir himself. Even when Kiev and Rus fractured and later fell under Mongol domination, orthodoxy endured. It became a cultural anchor in a time of ruin, preserving history, language, and faith while cities burned and rulers submitted to foreign khans. The metropolitan seat shifted from Kiev to Vladimir, then to Moscow, a city that would one day claim to be the Third Rome. That claim grew stronger after the fall of Byzantium in 1453, when Ivan III married Sophia Paleologina, niece of the last Byzantine emperor. Symbolically, the Orthodox imperial mantle passed to Moscow. And in this new identity, one figure was always remembered, St. Vladimir, the baptizer and nation builder. Today, his statue overlooks the Dnieper in Kiev, standing where the idol of Perun was once cast into the river. In one hand, he holds a cross. In the other, the legacy of a realm where crown and church were inseparable. The year 988 was not merely the Christianization of a people, it was the birth of an Orthodox civilization, one that would survive war, invasion, and empire, tracing its origins back to that moment on the riverbank when the soul of Rus was submerged and reborn. In the late 9th century, however, those lands were still wild, tribal, and drenched in blood. Endless forests stretched across the horizon. Rivers were both lifelines and battlefields. Pagan gods ruled the skies, and clan rivalries were settled with axes, not treaties. It was in this brutal world, around the year 890, that Olga was born, most likely in Pskov, a northern Slavic town along the Velikaya River. Her early life remains a mystery. No chronicler recorded her childhood, but history remembers her as one of the most formidable women the Slavic world would ever see. At the time, the powerful Rurikid dynasty was uniting the scattered Slavic tribes under their Norse-descended princes. Kiev and Rus was emerging, a confederation of city-states thriving on trade, tribute, and, when necessary, terror. In her teenage years, Olga married Igor of Kiev, the son of Rurik himself. It was no love match, it was a political alliance. By marrying into the ruling elite, Olga stepped into a world where power had one purpose: to expand and hold control, dominate and unify the fragmented Slavic world under a single iron rule. That was the Rurikid mission. But Olga was no silent ornament to her husband's reign. Even as a young consort, she was watching, learning. She rode with Igor on campaigns, saw how tribute was taken, how rebellions were crushed, and how loyalty was bought with gold or broken with steel. She studied the game of power in a land where hesitation meant death. The society around her was steeped in pagan belief. The Slavic gods were as volatile as the people who worshipped them: Perun, the thunderer; Veles, lord of trade and the underworld. Superstition ruled daily life. Tribes swore loyalty with animal sacrifices and sealed pacts with blood. For a woman to rise in this world was almost unthinkable. But fate and vengeance would hand Olga a crown no woman had worn before, and she would wield it without apology. The turning point came in 945. Prince Igor, her husband, was out collecting tribute from the Drevlians, a neighboring tribe. He had already taken their payment once, but greed, or perhaps arrogance, drove him back for more. The Drevlians saw an insult, not a transaction. They seized him, tied his limbs to two bent birch trees, and let them snap back, ripping him apart in one of the most infamous executions in Slavic history. In Kiev, word reached Olga. Her husband was dead. Her son, Sviatoslav, was still a child. And everyone knew the script for a widow in her position: step aside, remarry, or serve as a powerless figurehead while ambitious men ruled in her name. Olga tore up the script. The Drevlians, emboldened by their victory, sent 20 nobles to Kiev with an offer: marry their Prince Mal, and the bloodshed would end. It was audacious, offensive, even. They had just murdered her husband, and now they expected her to join them. But they believed she was too weak, too frightened to say no. Olga smiled. She accepted the proposal, at least in words. She invited the envoys to enjoy a bath before meeting her officially. Once they stepped inside, she had the doors barred, the building set ablaze, and every man burned alive. This was not negotiation. This was a declaration. Olga would not be intimidated, and she was only getting started. Olga's vengeance was a slow, deliberate storm. The first Drevlian envoys had burned. The second, those foolish enough to believe her feigned acceptance, were invited to a lavish feast in Kiev. The wine flowed, the toasts rang out, and when the hall was warm and the guests were drunk, Olga's soldiers struck. The floor ran red. In just days, she had eliminated nearly every Drevlian negotiator. The Drevlians had gambled on her weakness. What they found instead was a ruler who thought in campaigns, not skirmishes. Next came the heart of her plan, the destruction of Iskorostan, the Drevlian capital, where her husband had been torn apart. She didn't storm the gates. Not yet. She sent word that she wanted to hold a proper funeral feast for Igor. Believing she was finally seeking peace, the Drevlians welcomed her with open arms. They filled the tables, poured their best wine, and served their enemy as an honored guest. It was their last meal. At the height of the celebration, Olga gave the signal. Her warriors fell upon the drunken crowd, killing more than 5,000 in a single night. The survivors scrambled behind the city walls, thinking their defenses would save them. They hadn't yet learned walls could not keep out Olga's patience. She besieged the city for weeks, letting hunger and fear do their work. Then came her final offer: surrender, and she would spare them. All she asked was a small token from each household: 3 pigeons and 3 sparrows. Desperate, the Drevlians agreed. The birds were delivered, and Olga's forces tied to each one a bundle of cloth and sulfur. Released, the birds returned to their nests under the city's thatched roofs. That night, the skies over Iskorostan glowed. Flames spread from rooftop to rooftop in an instant. As the people ran screaming from the burning city, Olga's soldiers cut them down or bound them in chains. Iskorostan was no longer a capital. It was ash and memory. Her vengeance complete, Olga did something almost more shocking. She stayed in power. She did not remarry. She did not step aside. She ruled, and she ruled well. With her son Sviatoslav still a boy, she took full control of Kiev and Rus, wielding the same precision in governance that she had in war. Her first major act was to reform the tribute system, the very flaw that had cost Igor his life. No longer would warbands ride out demanding payment at sword point. Olga established fixed collection points, called pogasti, and appointed officials to oversee them. It was the birth of a rudimentary bureaucracy in a land still half wild. For a society used to chaos, this was revolutionary. Olga had proven she could destroy, but now she was showing she could build. Olga's reforms transformed Kiev and Rus from a loose network of tribute-bound tribes into a state that could function without relying solely on fear. Standardized taxation, fixed collection points, and organized administrative units brought stability, wealth, and order. For the first time, power in Kiev rested on structure as much as on the sword. But Olga was not content with ruling at home. She looked outward. The greatest prize in diplomacy was Byzantium, then at the peak of its influence. Few rulers dared approach the imperial capital in person, and fewer still were women. Yet in the mid-950s, Olga sailed south down the Dnieper, crossed the Black Sea, and entered Constantinople as the sovereign ruler of Rus. Emperor Constantine VII Porphyrogenitus, one of the most powerful monarchs in the Christian world, recorded her visit in his own writings. She arrived not as a supplicant, but as an equal. She demanded full honors and received them. Constantine was impressed by her intelligence, her composure, and the quiet steel beneath her diplomacy. According to Byzantine accounts, the emperor was so taken with her that he proposed marriage. Olga did not refuse outright. Instead, she asked first to be baptized, suggesting that only then could they discuss such a union. Constantine agreed, personally sponsoring her conversion to Christianity. In a grand ceremony, she took the name Helena, likely in honor of his empress. Then came her countermove. When Constantine pressed the marriage question again, Olga reminded him that, as her baptismal sponsor, he was now her spiritual godfather. A marriage between them would be considered incest under Christian law. The emperor, outplayed, could do nothing but admire the elegance of her track. Olga left Constantinople with more than a new faith. She left with the respect of an empire. This version is already strong, but it can be made even more gripping by tightening some phrasing, sharpening the imagery, and subtly increasing the dramatic tension. Here's a refined take that keeps all the historical beats intact, but makes the political chess match feel even more deliberate. Olga's reforms turned Kiev and Rus from a patchwork of tribute-bound tribes into a functioning state that no longer relied solely on fear. She replaced unpredictable raids with standardized taxation, fixed collection points, and organized administrative districts, bringing stability, wealth, and order. For the first time, Kiev's power rested on structure as much as on the sword. But Olga's ambitions didn't stop at her borders. The ultimate stage for diplomacy was Byzantium, then at the height of its power. Few rulers dared to approach the imperial capital in person, and fewer still were women. Yet in the mid-950s, Olga sailed down the Dnieper, crossed the Black Sea, and entered Constantinople not as a vassal, but as the sovereign ruler of Rus. Emperor Constantine VII Porphyrogenitus, one of Christendom's most powerful monarchs, recorded her visit himself. She demanded full honors and received them. He was struck by her poise, her intellect, and the steel hidden beneath her courtesy. According to Byzantine accounts, the emperor was so impressed that he proposed marriage. Olga did not reject him outright. Instead, she requested baptism first, hinting that only then could such a union be considered. Constantine agreed, personally sponsoring her conversion. In a grand ceremony, she took the name Helena, likely in honor of his empress. Then came her move. When Constantine pressed the proposal again, Olga reminded him that, as her baptismal sponsor, he was now her spiritual godfather. Marriage between them would be incest under Christian law. The emperor, checkmated by his own faith, could only admire the elegance of her strategy. Olga left Constantinople not just with a new religion, but with the respect of an empire. If you want, I can now blend this seamlessly into the earlier vengeance and reform section so it reads as one flowing narrative of Olga's rise. That would make it feel like part of a single documentary script rather than two stitched together scenes. Here's a tighten, more cinematic rewrite of that section so it flows with the same weight and pacing as your earlier pieces. If she could not turn her son to the cross, perhaps her grandson might listen. And so Olga, the widow who once burned a city with birds, now waged a different kind of rebellion, not with fire, but with faith. As Sviatoslav came of age, Olga gradually stepped back from direct rule, but her presence still loomed over the court. She had embraced Christianity. Her son marched under the banner of the old gods. Sviatoslav was the archetypal warrior king. No patience for bureaucracy, no taste for diplomacy, and no interest in the faith his mother had brought from Constantinople. He slept on the ground, dressed like his men, and lived for war. His campaign stretched east and south. He crushed the Khazars, battled the Volga Bulgars, and even clashed with the Byzantine Empire itself. Where Olga had built systems, Sviatoslav pursued conquest. Where she had opened trade routes, he led raids. The Christian churches she had raised stood quietly in the background, often ignored. Pagan rites continued. Perun was still worshipped. Yet even in this return to the old ways, Olga remained the anchor of the realm. She kept the treasury full, the capital running, and ties with Byzantium intact. She ruled in her son's absence, which was often, and kept chaos at bay. Sviatoslav respected his mother but refused baptism. To him, Christianity was a faith for the weak, a religion of peace, unsuited to warriors. I will not adopt the faith, he made clear, but I will not forbid you to follow it. And so mother and son ruled side by side, a Christian matriarch and a pagan king, two visions for Rus sharing the same throne. Only one of them was thinking beyond the next campaign. Olga saw what her son could not, that the old ways could not bind Rus forever. Paganism had passion, but no spine. Christianity offered law, alliances, and a place in a wider world. She would not live to see it take root, but she had planted the seed. In 969, nearly 80 years old, a remarkable age for her time, Olga of Kiev breathed her last. She had outlived wars, uprisings, and betrayal. She died not merely as a widow or the mother of a prince, but as the matriarch of Kiev and Rus, revered by both Christians and pagans. With her passing, the fragile balance she had maintained between vision and tradition was gone, and the fate of Rus would pass into rougher hands. According to the primary chronicle, her final wish was unambiguous. She wanted a Christian burial. Sviatoslav, still a pagan, honored it. No burning, no rites to Perun, only the cross. She died disappointed in one respect. Her son remained unconverted. But in truth, she had done something greater. She had tilled the soil in which Christian Rus would one day take root. Her grandson, Vladimir, saw everything, the ceremonies, the diplomacy, the moral authority with which Olga ruled. And when his turn came, he would finish what she began. Olga's death left a vacuum. Without her, the Christian mission in Rus seemed to stall. The churches she had built stood mostly empty. Missionaries preached to half-listening crowds. The court returned to its old ways. It could have ended there. Olga remembered only as the fierce widow who burned cities with birds and outplayed emperors. But history had other plans. The Byzantine Empire never forgot her. In Constantinople, she was remembered as the first royal woman of Rus to receive baptism, one who had met their emperor as an equal and matched their diplomacy move for move. Her name carried weight, and her story traveled. In Rus too, her legend grew, not just as a ruler, but as a spiritual pioneer. It would take another generation before Rus officially embraced Christianity. But when it did, the people did not look to foreign missionaries or to Byzantium for their model. They looked back at Olga, the princess who ruled with fire and died with a cross. When the church made her a saint, they weren't canonizing a cloistered ascetic or a martyred preacher. They were canonizing a tactician, a visionary, a mother of nations. Years after her death, Princess Olga of Kiev was declared equal to the apostles, a title reserved for those who changed the spiritual destiny of entire peoples. She had not written sermons or died for the faith. What she had done was rare. She bridged two worlds, one pagan and brutal, the other imperial and Christian, and stood unshaken between them. Her canonization was not for her conversion alone. It was for her vision. Before Olga, Kievan Rus was a web of tribal loyalties, blood feuds, and gods who demanded sacrifice. She brought structure, taxation, diplomacy, long-term statecraft. And when she brought vengeance, it was not chaos, it was calculated. The destruction of the Drevlians was not simply punishment, it was a lesson. After Olga, there was no longer any question women could rule. Not as shadows behind a throne, not as caretakers waiting for a prince to return, but with absolute, unshakable authority. Her reign became a declaration, a precedent carved into the stone of Slavic history. She did not ride behind a man. She led the charge. She commanded armies with a steady hand and a mind sharper than any blade. She burned cities that defied her. She sat across from emperors, meeting their gaze without flinching, and walked away with terms that reshaped her realm. She rebuilt her state piece by piece, turning chaos into order, and she never remarried because she had no need for a husband to legitimize her power. Spiritually, she opened a path that would change the soul of her people forever. Her grandson, Vladimir the Great, would one day stand at the banks of the Dnieper River in the year 988, ordering the baptism of his entire realm into the Orthodox faith. But Vladimir did not begin on an empty foundation. He stood on the bedrock Olga had laid, stone upon stone, brick upon brick, church by church, act by deliberate act. History remembers Vladimir as the baptizer of Rus, but the truth is quieter, older. The one who carried the torch through the long night was Olga. She kept it alive in the winds of war, in the storms of politics, in the bitter cold of loss. Her mark still lingers, in Orthodox liturgy, in the patterns of Slavic folklore, in the whispered tales of queens and princesses who dared to defy the roles assigned to them. Olga was not a gentle saint carved in marble. She was fire and iron, brutal and brilliant, vengeful yet visionary. She was a flame that refused to die, a light that instead spread, illuminating the path for an entire nation's soul. She was baptized in faith, baptized in fire, and her legend remains, not as a fading echo, but as a presence, like the smoke that hangs in the air after a siege, like incense that drifts slowly through the stillness of a chapel. Princess Olga of Kiev was no ordinary ruler. She was the mother of empire.